In this video, we will demonstrate how to replace the HRT 5H radiant toaster top heater kit, part number 7001035. Upon unpacking the kit, it will contain several components. The main item is the top heater assembly kit. It also includes two green insulator cards for the sides. It also includes two white insulation strips, one top heater insulation, heater wire set, heater nut retention tool, 4 insulation retaining clips, and self-tapping screws for the heater. The following are the recommended tools and instruments that will facilitate replacement of the HRT 5H top heater kit: a rubber mallet or hammer, a scraper or chisel, slip joint pliers, needle nose pliers, 11/32 nut driver, 3/8 nut driver, 11/32 open end wrench, a magnetic telescopic tool, wire snips, scissors or utility knife, stubby screwdriver with a slotted tip, long Phillips screwdriver, long slotted screwdriver, inspection mirror, flashlight, heat resistive protective gloves, and a multimeter. After unpacking the heater kit and verifying the contents, the next step is to ensure that the heater has the proper resistance values prior to installing it. Set your ohm meter to the ohm scale, preferably a self-ranging meter that would start on mega ohms. Make sure your meter zeroes out, and we're going to check various points. You're going to measure from the corner to the nearest center, and the resistance value should be between 19 to 21 ohms. As you can see, we are in range. Next, measure from the opposite corner to the nearest center, and once again, 19 to 21 ohms is the acceptable range, and we're within range. Upon verifying continuity on both heaters, the next step is to verify that there are no short circuits to ground. Perform as follows. Check from the corner terminal to chassis. As you can see, it's OL, it's open. Next, measure from the center terminal to chassis ground, followed by the next center terminal to chassis ground, and the last corner terminal to chassis ground. As you can see, we are registering open line to ground, which indicates this heater is not short-circuited to ground. Also inspect it for any physical damage which could have resulted from shipping or mishandling. Do not install the heater kit if it fails the visual check or the resistance check or the ground check. Turn the power off and unplug the power cord from the power source and allow the unit to cool down if possible. If cooling down is not a possibility, ensure that you use protective heat-resistant gloves to remove the accessories that will be hot. Remove the front and the rear silver curtains. And set aside. If the toaster is hot during servicing, use protective gloves and remove the top cover by lifting it straight up and away from the toaster and set aside. Next, remove the center scoop by removing the 2 hex nuts using an 11/32 nut driver. Then remove the 2 corner end plates using a Phillips screwdriver. With the scoop removed and the 2 end plates removed, make a note on the scoop. At one end, there are these open slots. These have to point towards the non-display side that line up with these air vents across the top. This will be required during the reinstallation process. Do not install it backwards. It must be installed in the correct orientation. Next, we're going to loosen and remove the top 4 heater terminal hex nuts. However, it's preferred if you secure the bottom hex nut using the supplied nut retaining tool that came with the heater kit. Position that onto the bottom hex nut. Then take your 3/8 nut driver and loosen the top hex nut. You're going to secure the bottom hex nut and loosen the top hex nut. Note, in some cases, if the terminal is heavily burnt or damaged and you are unable to remove the hex nut, you can apply a few drops of oil, let it sit for a few minutes, and then work the nut back and forth, clockwise, counterclockwise, back and forth. If that is still not sufficient, you may just cut the wire at the ring terminal, since the new wires are supplied with the new heater kit. Next, we're going to open the non-display side service panel by removing the top 3 screws and loosening the bottom 2 screws. Open the non-display side panel. Next, we need to remove the galvanized bulkhead panel, which is secured with 2 nuts at the top. You would require an 11/32 nut driver to remove the nuts. Then you can remove the galvanized bulkhead panel. Locate the 2 top hex nuts on the bulkhead panel and remove them with a 11/32 nut driver. Once removed, set the panel aside. Next, remove the rectangular white insulation strip to expose the thermocouple C. Locate the 2 hex nuts and remove the 2 nuts using an 11/32 nut driver and extract the sensor C completely. With the 2 hex nuts removed, extract the thermocouple C completely. Depending on the style that you have, you may have the 2-piece style or the single piece that is welded. Verify if the gasket is still attached to the firewall or if it became detached when you removed it. The gasket will be used for reassembly. If it's already in place as shown, you may leave it in place. If it was removed, remember to reinstall it over the studs. Next, take scissors and cut 3 slits along the bottom 3 circles for the bottom heaters. Next, extract the 2 retaining clips by pulling them off completely. Keep in mind, we are supplying new clips with the heater. Next, remove the white blanket insulation and set aside as we need to reuse it. Next, we will remove the top 3 screws shown here, 1, 2, 3, that secure the top galvanized panel to the chassis. In addition, we want to attempt and remove the bottom 4 screws shown here, 1, 2, 3, 4. These 4 screws are the ones that support and secure the heater to the chassis. Removing the top 3 should be fairly easy. However, removing the bottom 4 may present some challenges, especially if they become very difficult to loosen or to completely remove. If you are unable to remove these 4 screws during this process, leave them as is. We'll show you a little bit later in the video how to shear them off. As you can see, I was able to remove the top 3 galvanized panel screws. However, I was only able to remove 3 of the 4 bottom heater retainment screws. This one would require to be sheared off, showing, and will be demonstrated a little bit later in the video. Next, we will move over to the display side of the toaster. We must remove the top 3 screws and loosen the bottom 2 screws if your toaster is equipped. As you can see here, our toaster does not have 2 bottom screws because it has the hinge style service panel. Proceed and remove the top 3 screws and loosen the bottom 2 screws if equipped. Upon opening the service panel, the first observation is to determine what insulation is up against the firewall. As shown here, this insulation has these little finger slits. That is the most up-to-date insulation. The older toasters would have a different insulation which did not have these finger slits cut into it. There are some differences between the two, which will be explained a little bit later in the video. In this case, we'll be working with the new insulation with the finger slits. Okay. In order to access the top galvanized panel screws and the heater mounting screws, we have to remove several components before we can access them further. We would have to dismount the high limit, dismount the motor with motor board, and we would also dismount the 2 solid state relays. Loosen and remove the black protective cap by rotating it counterclockwise. If necessary, use pliers. Next, take slip joint pliers and loosen and remove the brass nut. After removing the high limit mounting brass nut, before removing the high limit, proceed and remove the wire connectors from the motor board. Note, it may be necessary to snip some of the plastic wire zip ties in order to facilitate that. Make sure you use a suitable wire snipper. Before removing the wire harness connections, take a picture so you know the orientation of each connector. Pull up on the connector. Do not pull on the wire itself. Connectors have been removed. After removing the motor board wire harness connections, proceed and loosen and remove the 4 hex nuts beneath the motor. There are 2 on the right side, front and back, and there are 2 on the left side, front and back. You will use an 11/32 open end wrench or suitable socket to loosen and remove the hex nuts. With the 4 hex nuts removed beneath the motor, remove the motor by lifting it and tilting it at an angle so that you can disconnect the drive motor sprocket from the bicycle chain that is behind the motor. This may take a little bit of effort. Next, remove and dismount the high limit and swing it to the side. After dismounting the motor and swinging the high limit off to the side, next proceed and dismount the snubber board by pulling it up vertically off the 2 mounting plastic clips and set to the side. Next, at the bottom of each solid state relay, there are 2 Phillips screws that secure the relays to the mounting bracket. Proceed and remove both screws completely. With the 2 screws removed from the bottom of the solid state relays, now you can lift the solid state relay and tilt it forward as shown. And all this will be required to gain access to the 4 heater mounting screws and to facilitate the removal and installation. If your toaster has this particular style of firewall insulation with the finger slits, the next step is to lift the outer layer up to expose the backside as shown. Now, regardless of the insulation that is up against your firewall, once you access this area here, we need to cut several slits to remove the insulation. First, cut a slit using scissors or utility knife below the bottom heater here. 1, 2, 3. Next, you need to cut another slit in the upper left corner by the wiring harness here. Next, lift the insulation card window and physically remove the insulation strip. Next, as done on the opposite side, take a 11/32 nut driver and loosen and remove both hex nuts and physically pull out sensor A and B, also known as thermocouple A and B, and the high limit bulb that is mounted behind the bracket. With the two thermocouple A and B hex nuts removed, carefully extract thermocouple A and B. You may have to wiggle it slightly as you pull it away. Also, take the high limit bulb and just swing it out of the way temporarily. You need to verify what style of thermocouple assembly you have. If it's the two-piece style shown here, or if it's the single piece that is welded. Be careful not to damage the tip and just set it aside. Also, ensure that the green mounting gasket is mounted in place over the studs for reassembly. Next, remove the two upper insulating card mounting clips by physically extracting them away from the toaster. The new heater is supplied with the clips. Remove the insulating card and set aside. Next, we need to repeat the process for the white insulating blanket. Cut 4 strips, 1, 2, 3, and 4, just like on the insulating card. With the 4 slits cut, 3 on the bottom and 1 on the upper left corner, physically dismount the entire white blanket insulation and carefully set it aside. Next, we need to remove the 2 upper Phillips screws that secure the top galvanized panel to the chassis, and also remove the 4 bottom heater screws that secure the old heater to the chassis. As previously explained, removing the upper screws should be fairly easy. However, removing the bottom 4 screws may become difficult at times or may seize up. If that is the case, we will need to shear them off, which will be detailed a little bit later. I was able to remove the upper 2 galvanized panel screws. However, I was only able to remove 3 out of the 4 bottom heater mounting screws. Unfortunately, we will have to shear this one off, just like on the opposite side. One note, prior to loosening up the nuts, or in this case the screws, it is advisable that you squirt at least a drop or 2 of oil to help soak the screw head, which also may help facilitate the removal of the old screws. Next, on the double pole relay to my left, we need to physically remove the bottom 2 black wires. Please observe the location of the wires so that you do not crisscross these upon installation. On the bottom right, it should be black wire number 06, shown here. On the bottom left, it should be black wire number 04, shown here. Next, we must remove 2 white wires from the rear left lug of the contactor, which are the 2 white wires coming back from heater A and B. To remove them, you will need a small stubby slotted screwdriver to loosen up the lug for one of the wires, and the second wire is just a quick disconnect. As you can see here, here's a top view of the contactor. We need to remove white wire number 07 and also white wire number 05. White wire number 07 is attached to a blue quick disconnect female. That one you can just pull completely off the contactor. However, to remove white wire number 05, we must loosen up the slotted screw on the lug. With the two black wires disconnected from the double pole solid state relay and the two white wires disconnected from the rear left corner lug of the contactor, next we need to snip and remove the plastic zip tie on the upper left corner that is securing the harnesses to the sleeving. Next, remove the top galvanized panel completely by lifting straight up. Keep in mind, one side of the galvanized panel contains 3 tapped holes for 3 screws, which is used on the non-display side of the machine. The opposite side only has 2 tap holes, which goes towards the display side. Very important when you reassemble this, not to mix it. Next, remove the 4 wires from the heater terminals. At this stage, the nuts were already removed earlier in the video. Since the wires are going to be replaced, which are included in the heater kit, you may slide them out towards the display side of the machine. Pull the 4 wires into the display side of the toaster along with the protective sleeving. Next, remove the 4 top insulation retaining clips. Keep in mind, you may need to reuse some old clips. With the 4 insulation retainers removed, carefully remove the top white insulation blanket and set aside. The toaster kit is supplied with a new insulation blanket. Okay, next, we need to remove the side white insulation strips from both sides. You may need to use a slotted screwdriver or similar tool to extract it and fish it out. With the 2 white insulation strips removed from both sides, we need to proceed and remove the 2 green insulating card strips. However, before you remove the strips, note that there is a cutout at one end of each strip. That cutout must face towards the rear of the toaster, which is basically the power cord side. The new heater kit is supplied with new green insulator card strips and new white insulator strips as well. With the 2 green insulator card strips removed from both ends, as you recall, we had 2 screws for the heater become stripped and seized. One on the left side, one on the right side. As you can see here, there's full access to the screw now. There's 1 screw, and the next step would be to shear it off using either a flat blade chisel or a scraper as shown here. Whatever is easier for you, position that directly over the screw and use a mallet to carefully shear it off. With the remaining heater mounting screws sheared off as needed, if needed, now you may proceed and remove the heater completely by lifting up, straight up and away. Go. With the old heater removed from the toaster, take the new heater and make a quick observation on both sides of the heater. You will notice that there's 2 oval holes at one end and 2 at the opposite end. Notice there is a short offset here and a longer offset here. Position the heater so that the short offset is closest to the rear of the toaster towards the power cord side. Carefully drop the heater in place The first step is to secure the heater to the non-display side of the unit, but first we must slightly lift the heater up so that the 4 threaded holes of the heater line up with the 4 holes on the housing. As you lift the heater, line up the hole and start one of the self-tapping screws. Do not tighten. Leave loose for the time being. And install the 3 remaining screws, but once again, leave them loose. With the 4 screws installed, 1, 2, 3, 4, but not tightened, you can see there's a little wiggle room. Now we must repeat the same step at the opposite end of the heater. Lift the heater at the opposite end, and again, insert 1 screw. Do not tighten, just thread it in a few times and install the remaining 3 screws. With the heater in place and supported with the 8 screws, 4 on one side, 4 on the other, now you may proceed and completely torque down the 8 screws to firmly secure the heater in place. Once the heater has been secured in place with all 8 screws, 4 on one side, 4 on the other, take the new green insulator card and position it as shown. As you can see, there are 4 oval slots along the bottom, 2 holes that are offset, and a rectangular cutout at the top corner. These 4 cutouts must fit over the 4 screws along the side. Insert the card so that this cutout is facing the rear of the toaster towards the power cord side. Do not install it the opposite direction. It must be installed with the cutout towards the power cord side. Insert the card along the wall. Ensure that it covers and encases the 4 screws as shown. Repeat this at the opposite end. Next, take the 2 new white insulation strips. As you would notice, they all have 4 cutouts along the bottom, which must fit over the 4 screws. And there's also 2 holes for the thermocouple sensors. You must push the insulation through to expose the holes. Next, you're going to insert with the short offset towards the rear of the toaster facing the power cord side. And you're going to insert it along the way until it's completely bottomed out. Use a scraper carefully to facilitate the seating of the white insulation. Once it's completely seated, follow the same procedure for the opposite side. With both white insulation strips fully inserted as shown here, next reconfirm that the green insulator card is positioned as shown with the 2 holes lining up with the housing holes on the display side. And on the non-display side, you have 2 additional holes and a 3rd hole here. Next, move over to the display side. On the display side, take a large slotted screwdriver and fully punch through the existing insulation, which will allow clearance for the reinsertion of the thermocouple A and B assembly. Repeat this at the opposite end, but there is only 1 hole that will be punched through. On the non-display side, repeat the process by punching through the insulation to ensure that the reinsertion of the thermocouple C does not become contaminated with additional insulation. Take the new top blanket insulation and push out the 4 pre-cut out holes as shown. Next, position the blanket directly over the heater and ensure that all 4 studs engage the pre-cut hole. secure the insulation with the 4 new retainer clips or the pre-existing retainer clips. Okay. Insert the new or old insulation retaining clips by pushing over the studs to secure the insulation blanket in place. Ensure all 4 corners are secured as shown. Next, loosen and remove all 4 top hex nuts using a 3/8 nut driver. With the top hex nuts removed, next, re-secure the bottom hex nuts using a 3/8 nut driver or the supplied tool. Remove the fiberglass sleeving from the old wire set. Take the new wire set, position all 4 ring terminals as shown, bundle them together, and insert it into the old existing fiberglass sleeving as shown. Go. Take the new wire set and insert the 4 ring terminals through the second right-hand hole. Do not insert into the left hole, insert to the right-hand hole as shown. Feed the wire set at least 10 inches. Go. Beginning on the corner terminal closest to the display side, this corner terminal must be black wire number 04. Insert the ring terminal over the stud. The closest center terminal must be white wire number 05. Insert it over the stud. Next, insert black wire number 06 on this center terminal, closest to the non-display side. Next, insert white wire number 7 to the top corner terminal, closest to the non-display side. Install the new top 4 stainless steel hex nuts and manually thread until finger tight on all 4 heater terminals. Reconfirm that the 4 insulation retaining clips are installed as shown with the length side running front to back. Do not install the clips sideways with the length side running side to side. This will be incorrect. This will be correct for all 4. Next, position the wires as shown. White wire number 7 should run parallel to this retainer clip. Black wire number 6 and white wire number 5 should run at a 45-degree angle. And black wire number 04 should run straight. Insert the supplied nut retaining tool onto the bottom hex nut. Then take your 3/8 nut driver and rotate the top nut clockwise until tight. Keep in mind the ring terminal may rotate on you. Repeat this process on the remaining 3 hex nuts. With the top 4 hex nuts secured and the wires positioned as shown, next, insert the protective wire sleeving through the housing until it protrudes approximately 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch and secure with a zip tie from the inside. Next, take the top galvanized panel, locate the 3 tapped holes on one side. The opposite side has 2, one side has 3 as shown here. These 3 holes must line up with the non-display side of the machine. Insert the panel until it's completely bottomed out. With the top galvanized panel seated in place, proceed to the non-display side of the unit and ensure that the top housing holes line up with the holes on the galvanized panel. You may need to shift the galvanized panel slightly up, down, or side to side in order to receive the screw. Insert the screw only a few turns. Do not tighten at this point. Okay. Proceed to the display side of the toaster and locate the 2 top housing holes ensure they line up with the 2 holes for the galvanized panel. You may need to slightly shift the galvanized panel in order to line up the holes. Insert the screws and proceed and tighten the screws completely. Then proceed to the non-display side and tighten the remaining 3 screws at the opposite end. Take the center scoop and observe the end. As you can see, there's openings here. These openings must line up and point towards the non-display side of the toaster where the vents are located across the top. Secure the scoop with the nuts. Reinstall the 2 corner end plates and secure them in place with the screws. Proceed to the non-display side of the toaster. Reconfirm that the bottom 4 heater screws are tightened, as well as the top 3 galvanized panel screws. In addition, it's good practice to ensure that the bottom 3 cowl rod heaters are tightened with a 3/8 nut driver and any other associated surrounding hardware. Next, reinstall the original white blanket insulation. As you recall, you had previously cut slits across the bottom to fit over the bottom cowl rods. With the white blanket insulation installed, resecure it with the 2 pre-existing or new retaining clips. Also verify that the green gasket for the thermocouple is installed up against the firewall. If it's not installed, locate it and reinstall it. It is crucial for the operation of the thermocouple C. Reconfirm that the green thermocouple C gasket is installed up against the firewall as shown. Note, if you have the 2-piece thermocouple design, take the sleeve and insert it into the hole until it's completely flush with the firewall. If your thermocouple is of the single piece design where it's welded, then you can insert it as one assembly. Next, insert the thermocouple until it's completely flush with the wall. With the thermocouple C installed, install the 2 hex nuts finger tight and then tighten them down with a 3/8 nut driver until snug. Then reinstall the rectangular insulation strip as shown. It's very critical to allow the insulation to cover up this entire area to prevent airflow from affecting the thermocouple reading. Next, take the galvanized bulkhead panel, position it with the 2 flanges towards the top, and insert it over the 2 top studs. Reinstall the 2 hex nuts and tighten them with a 11/32 nut driver. Next, we're going to check the heater continuity again with the wires already attached to the heater. We'll be checking it from the loose end of the wires. The sequence is as follows. Set your multimeter to the ohm scale. Verify your meter zeros out. Then take 1 meter lead and insert it inside the quick disconnect of black wire number 4 as shown. Then locate white wire number 505 and touch the end. The range should be between 19 to 21 ohms. We have 19.5, that's good. Next, check from black wire number 06. Insert your meter lead into the quick disconnect. Take your other meter lead and you're going to check white wire number 07. Insert it into the quick disconnect, and again, we should read between 19 to 21 ohms. We are within range. This confirms that our heater is wired correctly, and it's reading through the wiring as well. Next, we're going to attach and secure the white wires to the rear left lug of the contactor. There are 3 white wires, white number 05, white number 07, and white number 13. We're going to show this using a separate contactor outside of the machine for clarity purposes. As you can see, this would be considered the rear left. So white wire number 07 with the quick disconnect, you're going to push it on one of the spades in the back. Then you're going to take white wire number 5, insert it underneath the screw lug here. Then white wire number 13, which is part of the bottom heating circuit, you're going to insert it next to white wire number 5 beneath the screw of the lug. Okay. Then take your stubby screwdriver and tighten the set screw until tight. Reconfirm that the set screw is tightening down on the wire and not on the insulation of the wire, otherwise that circuit will not function. This is how your wiring should look once it's resecured to the contactor in the toaster. Next, take the original blanket insulation. As you recall, you had previously cut slits on the upper left corner and on the bottom 3 elements. Install it and position it over the 2 top studs. With the white blanket insulation installed up against the firewall, do not install the retainer clips. Next, take the yellow card insulation. The side with the finger strips must be lifted up, and install the back side with the previously cut strips in the same location. With the back side of the yellow cardboard insulation up against the firewall as shown, ensure that all the slits are cleared. Then we're going to retain the yellow cardboard insulation with the white insulation using the retainer clips. Lift the yellow cardboard window. Reconfirm that the green cardboard gasket is installed up against the firewall. Remember, it may have fallen off when you originally pulled out the thermocouple assembly. Make sure the gasket is installed in place. Next, verify which thermocouple assembly you have. If you have the 2-piece as shown here, insert the sleeve directly into the 2 holes. Reconfirm that the holes do not have insulation in the way, and just push it all the way through until it's flush. If you do not have the 2-piece design, you can just insert the thermocouple directly. Next, we must position the thermocouple as shown. There's 2 thermocouples shown. The longer probe is thermocouple A, should be on the left side. The shorter one is B, should be on the right side. Okay, you're going to insert it as shown. Then you're going to take the high limit capillary bulb and place it behind the top angled section of the bracket. Insert it until it's completely flush up against the firewall. With the thermocouple assembly up against the firewall, reinstall the 2 hex nuts and firmly secure with an 11/32 nut driver. Keep in mind that the capillary for the high limit must be positioned in place, as it can sometimes fall out of position. Once the thermocouple A and B assembly has been secured in place, reinstall the rectangular white insulation sleeve. Ensure it's seated completely all the way around, and then lower the yellow card insulation window as shown. Next, lower the front side of the yellow cardboard insulation. And ensure that all the finger slits are located behind the components and extended all the way down. Next, reposition the 2 solid-state relays. Insert the heatsink of the relay behind this bracket for both of them. Then secure both relay brackets using the 2 Phillips screws. With the 2 solid-state relays secured with the 2 bottom screws, next install the snubber board and snap it over those 2 plastic pins. Make sure the two black wires are towards the back side of the snubber board and snap it in place. Next, locate black wire number 04 and install the wire on the bottom left corner, which would be output A side of the solid state relay. Push it on until it clicks. Next, take wire number 06 and install that on the right side, which is the output B side. Good. Next, if the high limit mounting bracket had fallen off during the removal, make sure you reinstall it in place. Then take the high limit, position it with the capillary tube towards the top, and insert it. Next, secure the high limit in place using the original brass nut. Finger tighten it, then use the slip joint pliers to snug it up and reinstall the black protective cap. Note, it is normal for the green button to protrude or to, in some cases, remain stuck inward. That is completely normal. Next, take the motor assembly. Locate the sprocket and the set screw. Confirm that the set screw is tightened. In some cases, they may loosen up. Use a 3/32 hex key or an Allen key. Reconfirm that the measurement from the end of the shaft to the sprocket is approximately 1/2 inch, as shown here. If it's not 1/2 inch, adjust the sprocket accordingly. This is very critical to ensure proper alignment. Next, we need to insert the drive motor assembly onto the base, but at the same time, we have to engage the drive chain on the sprocket of the motor. This would come in at an angle, and we have to engage it. We're going to show a close-up of this outside of the toaster for visual reference only. First, ensure that the drive chain is engaged on the drive sprocket for the front shaft. Then when you come in with the motor, you have to come in at an angle and engage and hook the drive chain as shown. Then position it over the bottom studs. Go. Install the drive chain over the drive shaft sprocket. Hold it with your finger. In this case, we're going to install the drive motor without removing the transformer. In your particular case, if it's easier to remove the transformer to facilitate, you may proceed and remove the transformer. Take the motor and come in at an angle. Push it so that the bracket is behind the transformer, and use your index finger to basically ensure that the chain is wrapped around the sprocket teeth. Ensure the motor is now positioned over the bottom studs. Next, take your telescopic mirror and a flashlight and position the mirror as shown to confirm that the drive chain is correctly engaged with the sprocket tooth on the drive motor as well as on the drive shaft. If it is not, you must remove the motor and reinstall and make another attempt. Do not secure the motor without confirming the drive chain is properly attached to both sprockets. Next, reinstall the 4 hex nuts along the bottom base. Install them using your fingers and just finger tight for now. With the drive motor seated in place and the hex nuts only finger tightened, take the motor bracket assembly and slide it to the left as far as you can using your hand. This will apply tension to the drive chain. As you're holding the motor towards the left, retighten the 4 hex nuts using an 11/32 open end wrench. Once the drive motor has been secured with the 4 hex nuts beneath, reconfirm that the drive chain behind it is still engaged on the sprocket teeth and there is sufficient tension on the chain. Next, we're going to reinstall the wire connectors as follows. There is a yellow connector known as J3 with a black and white wire. Gets plugged into the rear right corner on the J3. There may be 1 or 2 pins. Make sure you completely seat it over those pins until it's completely seated. Next, take the large yellow connector, which is for the motor, and it's going to get plugged into J16 which are 5 pins. And you're going to place it over the 5 pins and push it down in place. Next, you're going to take your J9 connector, which is the 2 black wires here. It goes on J9 over these 2 pins. Next, take your J2 connector with the 2 black wires. This would be for your cooling fans. It plugs over J2 here. Next, take your yellow connector with the red, white, and yellow wire, and you're going to plug it on the J4 connector, but you must install it with the wires facing towards the inside of the board, as shown here. Again, place it over the 3 pins and snap it in place. And finally, you're going to take the J5 connector. This is very important. This first pin here with the white triangle must line up with the brown wire on this red connector. Double check your work after you completely seat it. Next, if necessary, reattach zip ties to secure or bundle some of the wires together. Once that is completed, ensure that all other electrical components are properly secured with their respective wiring, just in case something became detached during the heater replacement process. If you are in doubt, just remove and reseat the connectors. Next, carefully close the service side electrical panel. Ensure no wires become pinched along the way, and secure with the screws removed. Next, on the non-display side, reconfirm the large fan is properly secured with its 2 respective wires in case they became detached, and ensure the muffin bagel board is secured with its respective wiring. This top one should be red and black. Below that one should be a 6-wire harness, and off to the side would be an empty connector all by itself. Close the panel and secure with the screws. Next, standing from the rear of the toaster where the power cord is, you're going to notice that inside the toast chamber, you should see the 2 thermocouple tubes. Make sure these are protruding parallel and are not tilted up or down. As shown is normal. Next, confirm that this first tube has the thermocouple tip protruding. It must protrude between 1/4 of an inch up to 3/8 of an inch. If it's not protruding at least 1/4 of an inch, it will not monitor and detect accurate temperatures. If that is the case, it must be repositioned. Next, as you look into the toast chamber from the rear of the toaster, where the power cord side is, inside on your left-hand side, there should be 1 single aluminum tube. Make sure it's protruding directly parallel and that it has its protruding thermocouple junction. It should protrude between 1/4 of an inch up to 3/8 of an inch. If it's protruding significantly less than 1/4 of an inch, it must be readjusted by pushing it from the inside of the compartment towards the outside. Next, take the top cover and locate the opening at one end. This opening here must line up and point towards the non-display side of the toaster, which would be these vents here on the side. Do not install it the other way around. Carefully insert it and drop it until it's completely flush. Next, take the curtain and reinstall it on the front of the toaster, engaging the retaining rod on the 2 top clips. Repeat the process for the rear curtain. Take the power cord and plug it into the power source. Within a few seconds, your display should illuminate. Push the power button. Verify you hear a few clicks. And verify that both fans at both ends are running. Test the fans for airflow using a piece of paper. It should be sucking in at both ends. If the fans are not running, you need to contact the factory to perform troubleshooting. Next, with the toaster reading muffin weight, press and hold the menu button for a few seconds until heater A appears. Heater A, set point power is 75%, which is normal, 7.7 amps. Duty cycle 62% and fluctuating. 7.7, 7.6, 7.8 is normal. Heater A is working. Push the right arrow. Heater B should be identical. 75%, 7.4, 7.5 amps, 7.6, that's normal. Go to the right. Heater C, 50%, 7.6 amps, give or take. This is performing normal at this point. At this point, you can exit and allow the toaster 20 to 30 minutes to achieve operating temperature, at which case you can then test it with product.